On the 22nd of July 1977, a gory horror film titled The Hills Have Eyes opened in cinemas across the US. Within a few months, the film had raked in $25 million. It would soon become a franchise, with a sequel released in 1985 and a modern reboot released in 2006, which netted a total of $70 million at the box office. The basic concept of The Hills Have Eyes clearly appealed to horror fans, but few who watched it were aware that these blood-soaked films were actually inspired by the legendary Scottish cannibal known as Sawney Bean. Both versions of The Hills Have Eyes have a similar plot. A family sets out on a trip that takes them through a remote region of desert. During a stop for fuel, they get advice from a local man, who directs them along a shortcut which he claims will shave several hours off their journey. When they take the shortcut, however, they drive directly into an ambush. Spike strips puncture the tires of their car, leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere. Following horror movie convention, they split up into separate groups to try and find help, only to be targeted by a family of mutant cannibals that live in the vicinity and prey on travelers from out of town. The mutant cannibals in both versions make a meal of at least some of the family members, while others end up back at the cannibals' home, a rudimentary hidden cave. There, they manage to take out the cannibal patriarch, but it's left uncertain whether they'll escape the desert with their lives. This gruesome plot was dreamed up by writer and director Wes Craven. His directorial debut was the intentionally shocking horror film The Last House on the Left. But following his success, Craven wanted to move away from the horror genre. Unfortunately, or fortunately from the point of view of horror fans, he was unable to find financing for a movie in another genre. In need of money, he took on a horror movie project proposed by a friend of his, producer Peter Locke. Seeking inspiration, Craven went to the New York Public Library and began to research horrifying incidents from history. It was here that he stumbled upon the inspiration for the screenplay that would become The Hills Have Eyes. It was here that he encountered the tale of Sawney Bean. In the 16th century, Bean was a prolific cannibal, said to haunt a stretch of coastline in East Lothian, Scotland. Along with his wife, Black Agnes Douglas, Bean made a living by robbing, murdering, and cannibalizing passing travellers. When he and his wife had children, the legend says, Bean raised them as cannibals and encouraged them to start incestuous relationships with each other until he was the head of a 45-strong clan of murderous man-eaters. To avoid detection, Bean and his family lived in the depths of Benane Cave, a seaside cave the entrance to which is blocked by the sea whenever the tide is in. The group would carry out their ambushes at night, dragging victims back to the cave, where they would be carefully dismembered and preserved in wooden barrels to provide a food source for when prey was scarce. The males of the Bean clan became sophisticated hunters, able to take on not just individual travellers but large groups. The women of the Bean clan were generally confined to the cave, where they spent their days butchering and preserving meat. Of course, people in the surrounding towns and villages noticed that people often went missing, but generally put the disappearances down to wild animal attacks or other misfortunes. The simple fact was that the very idea of a cannibal clan living in a cave was so outlandish that, quite likely, nobody wanted to believe it. If any residents thought the deaths suspicious, it was much easier to blame one another. Indeed, several people were hanged after being accused of murders that were very likely carried out by the Bean family. These attacks continued for many years, until the Beans had claimed possibly as many as 5,000 victims. Eventually, though, the disappearances couldn't be written off any longer. When the clan attacked a married couple on their way home from a fair one night, they met their match. The wife was dragged from her horse and partially cannibalized, but her husband survived. He held off the Beans with a pistol until a 20-strong crowd, also heading home from the fair, arrived on the scene. Outnumbered, the Beans fled, leaving behind dozens of witnesses and plenty of evidence of their crime. These witnesses went before a magistrate in Glasgow and explained what they had seen. Quickly, a search party was organised. 400 armed men, accompanied by dogs and led, in some stories, by the king himself, followed the trail of the Beans to their cave and there found them surrounded by the cannibalised bodies of their victims. In some versions of the tale, the search party was so appalled that they loaded the mouth of the cave with gunpowder and forced a cave in, trapping the cannibal clan and ensuring that they would endure an agonising and lingering death in the dark. However, this version of events is considered unlikely, as the cave where Sawney Bean supposedly lived is, to this day, very much intact. The more common version of events runs that the party arrested the entire clan and dragged them back to Edinburgh in chains. There they were declared unfit to stand trial and executed in a variety of grisly manners. The women were burned alive and the men dismembered and allowed to bleed to death. The savagery of their executions was not unusual at the time, but often draws comment as being eerily similar to the savagery with which Bean and his many children treated their victims. Sawney Bean himself, the monster who started it all, was said to be the last to die, and according to some accounts his final words, screamed in rage as he was dismembered, were, "It is not over. It will never be over." This chilling tale served to inspire Wes Craven as he wrote the screenplay for The Hills Have Eyes. Many sources purport it to be true, allowing the movie to claim that it was based on a true story. But there's every chance that Bean was, in fact, a somewhat fanciful creation. The first written reports of him come from a time almost 100 years after Sawney Bean is most commonly said to have carried out his reign of terror, and are found printed in newspapers and handbills. It may be that the tale of Sawney Bean was simply a salacious story designed to sell books. The fact that most accounts of Sawney Bean were published in England rather than Scotland is also of note. At the time, with tension between Scotland and England high due to a series of Jacobite uprisings, the English press were keen to paint a picture of Scotland as a dark, strange, and macabre place. It may also be that the tale is based on a true story but has been exaggerated and changed through the years. Some people believe that Sawney Bean may have been based on the much older story of Christy Cleek. Born Andrew Christie, he was a butcher who lived in the 14th century and who resorted to cannibalism one harsh winter when food was in short supply. Having gained a taste for human flesh, Christie continued to waylay and butcher lone travellers, often pulling them from their horses with a long hooked rod known as a cleek. As his notoriety spread, he took a new name from his tool of trade, becoming Christy Cleek. It may be that Cleek was little more than a folk tale, a bogeyman whose existence became reinforced through the telling and retelling of old tales. Or it may be that Cleek was based on a real criminal. Although cannibalism is exceptionally rare in most cultures, there is a long history of criminals who are either desperate or suffering from mental ill health, resorting to it. Whatever story inspired Cleek, it is quite likely that Cleek inspired the tale of Sawney Bean, which in turn inspired the story of The Hills Have Eyes. While the veracity of the story is still uncertain, the essential elements of the story have captured public imagination throughout decades and centuries. The Hills Have Eyes may not be based on a true story, but it is based on a very old and oft-repeated one. The film is, simply, the most modern version of a very ancient tale.